We are in Chapter 3, and this chapter covers the tools that Photoshop was developed for. This is for professional photography, and this is the basics of Photoshop, correcting images. Traditional photography involves printing on paper, and there's texture involved, as well as color correction that's normally done in a studio in a dark room. And when you're working with digital, of course, you don't have that physical dark room. You have Photoshop to use as your dark room. So we're going to cover some things like adjusting tonal ranges and fixing lighting issues, as well as solving color problems. But we're also going to deal with removing grain from an image because everything was printed with some type of a texture to both the film and the paper that it was printed on. And these images can become scratched or otherwise damaged, and we are going to work on solving those issues and trying to restore the images as best as possible. So stage 1 is retouching a damaged item, and so this image is Rossi. We're going to start with this one, and if you'll zoom in to a 100% on here, so you can see that there are lots of areas here where you can actually see all of the texture from the original print. So this was a photograph that would have been scanned, and the light that comes up from the scanner as you're scanning picks up on all of the texture that was on the original paper that it was printed on, and so you get this lovely, well, it's not solid tones anymore. It gets to be kind of a mess. So we're going to try to correct that using our Photoshop tools. The first thing that we're going to apply to this image is a Gaussian blur. So we're going to go into Filter, and we're going to apply Blur, Gaussian blur. Now there are different types of blurs, and you can read about all of them on page 161. And you want to set that, I'm going to take this so I can show his hair, and you can see the difference between what the original image was, and let me zoom in a little bit more on that, and applying the blur. There we go. When I put my hand on it, you can see the texture in there, and when I release my hand, you'll see the blur applied. We want a 2-pixel Gaussian blur, and say OK to that. And you can see it softened that image, and we no longer see all those little texture marks going in his hair. But we have to do a sharpening on this. It's kind of funny, we just added a blur, but we're going to take that blur back. But it's going to leave us with nice even tones and not have all of that texture that we could see before. So now we're going to go back into Filter, and we're going to sharpen this image, and we're going to use Smart Sharpen. Smart Sharpen is going to give us another dialog box, and I'm going to move this around so you can see both his eye and his hairline. And we are going to set our amount of sharpening to 250%. Now remember, we had done a radius of 2 pixels for the blur, so we need to put in 2 pixels to take that blur away. We also want to reduce our noise by 10%. That was going to avoid sharpening any noise or that texture that we saw before. We don't want to sharpen and make that more visible. And our shadow amount we can leave as the default, but if that's not visible on shadows and highlights, expand that. Set your highlights, a fade amount, to 25%. That adjusts the amount of the sharpening. So if we reduce the sharpening in the highlights, so like on the brighter spot of his forehead. We will remove the noise that remains in those lighter portions. Tonal width and radius can stand at whatever default comes up, and click OK to sharpen that image up a little bit. We need you to save this image, and when you do a save as, you're going to not save it as the JPEG, you're going to save this as the Photoshop image, and then we'll proceed on. Make sure you read about understanding the shake reduction filter. Shake reduction was designed to reduce the blur caused by a shaking camera. Things that you're taking maybe at a slower shutter speed or something. This isn't designed to remove blur caused by a moving object. It's just to reduce shake in a specific area, not an entire image. But you'll see when you read through that how nicely that will work. So now we are on page 164, Heal Severe Scratches. And looking at the rest of this image, you're going to see that there's an issue. We have something that's an incorrect tone on his forehead. We have something that's not right on his chin. There's some severe scratches, a crease over here, and if you look at the top corner, there's a torn corner. So we have some items that we really need to work with on here to make this look like the original should have looked. We're going to go over to our tools and pick up our spot healing brush, and you'll see it looks like a band-aid with a little, almost looks like it's got a handle on it, but that's supposed to be a little spot circle behind it. So we want to pick up our spot healing brush. The spot healing brush samples the surrounding pixels to cover the area and blend it away. In our options bar for our mode, we're going to leave that on normal, and we want proximity match selected because we are going to pick up the pixels surrounding this little spot. In the brush picker preset, we want a 20 pixel brush and tab, and for this particular image we want to have 100% hardness. A lot of times we use a softer brush, and don't worry about spacing because we're just going to touch that area. All we need to do is place this over that orange spot and click, and the tool is going to select pixels surrounding that area and blend that area away. Scrolling down to the chin, we're going to pick up the healing brush tool. The healing brush tool lets us define settings just like we did for the spot healing brush. Our default is a 19 pixel brush, and that's actually large enough to cover that spot. So if we place the cursor directly below the spot we want to fix and hold down your Alt key, click to sample the pixels below, and then we're going to click and place that sampling on his chin. There's more about the healing brush and aligning the healing source on the top of page 166. Now we've improved the face a lot, but we have those other items that we need to deal with. So let's go now to the very top of the image where we have this torn off section. Pick up your rectangular marquee and click and drag to select that section and get that corner selected. Then you're going up to Edit, and you're going to select Fill. Under Contents, choose Content Aware. Mode should be normal, opacity should be 100%, color adaptation is selected, and click OK. The computer sits and thinks about it for just a few seconds, and then that area becomes filled, and it blends beautifully. deselect to turn off the marquee. There's now a crease on the right side. Let's look for that right down here, and you're going to use that same method, clicking and dragging, and edit, fill, and choose content aware again to blend out that crease. And on the left side, there's a spot up here that has some water damage, and we just draw a marquee around that, and again go to edit and choose fill content aware. Make sure then that you deselect, which shortcut is Control D. And now we're going to move down to take care of this lovely scratch on his shoulder. And to do that, we're going to use the clone stamp tool. Now the clone stamp looks kind of like a rubber stamp. And yeah, I guess kind of in a way it is. There's a pattern stamp and the clone stamp, and we're using the clone stamp. In your options bar, in order to get a brush that's going to be about the right size, we are going to open up the brush preset and get about a 50 pixel brush in here. And we want this one this time to be about a 50% hardness, which means it's going to have a soft edge, so not a harsh outline around this. It's going to have a bleed going off to it. You can see this is kind of how the brush is going to work. We want to make sure that we have aligned, clicked, and we're going to place the cursor over an area that we want to sample. So if we're looking over here, this is about the same slope right next to him. So we're going to hold down the Alt key and we'll get this lovely target thing, which you probably, most of you might have gotten when you sampled that for the healing brush. And we're going to sample this area. Just make sure that you're past where the scratch is. And we're going to click to sample that area and then pull that over and look at how the proxy of that looks and get that lined up as close as you possibly can, and then just click. We're not clicking and dragging, we're just clicking to place that clone part in. Now we're going to choose the lasso tool and we're going to circle the area with the scratches in the background above his shoulder. We don't want to pull up into the shoulder. In fact, this might take you a couple of different tries. I'm going to zoom in a little bit tighter on here. Just want to pick up this area. We're going to go to Edit, Fill, and again we're going to use Content Aware. Deselect, Control D or Select, deselect, and we're going to do the same thing to put an area in that's going to take out that scratch in his jacket. Now remember, this jacket has some striping going on, so it's going to take the computer just a little bit longer. Edit, Fill, Content Aware, and it didn't take any time at all, but look at how it's repeated the type of pattern that's going on here, especially when you deselect and you cannot tell where that was pulled from. So let's look at this image again, and we have a pretty nice cleaned up image here. Now there's a few things that a person could go in. There's a couple of little smaller damaged areas in here that you actually, if you wanted to, could go in with the spot healing brush and just touch up on some of those. It kind of makes that background a little bit neater, but there isn't really much of anything else that needs to be done to this image to make it look as it should have, or probably did look when it was originally printed. You can save this image, Rossi fixed. And to be quite honest with you, I would save that as the Rossi Photoshop image and then save it as Rossi fixed. And for my purposes, I need to see the finished file. I would save this as a JPEG, smaller, for you to send. A large file is only 310K.